Hi, welcome back. So you might have remembered in our last video we started working on a Napoleonic Hussar and his mount. And last time we did the horse, we finished him up, and he looks like this. In case you missed the other video, I recommend actually that you go back and check that one out if you haven't already, because I give a pretty extensive introduction to this whole project, which I'm not going to do right now. What we are going to do this time is go ahead and continue the painting of the Hussar himself, and this is him right here. Since the last video, I have painted his flesh on his face and his hands using my normal method because there's plenty to do on this figure already without having to worry about the skin, so we're not going to, but you can probably figure that out from some of my other tutorials. So I think that's pretty much it. I just have a couple quick things to mention before we get started. First of all, I have a couple corrections for the last video. I actually posted them in the comments for part one, but I thought I'd mention them again here anyway. First of all, I said last time that this was a Perry figure. Well, it kind of is. It is sculpted by Perry, I'm pretty sure, but it's actually sold by Wargames Foundry. It was produced for them, but the Perrys did a lot of sculpts for them, so, you know. Secondly, I mentioned the book that I was using last time for my painting reference. I said that the guy who painted it actually was there in the Napoleonic camps doing the, and did his paintings based on that. That's actually not true. The book was illustrated sometime, or the pictures were made sometime after the Napoleonic War by basically the author had commissioned the artist to do a lot of research and basically make a painting of every conceivable French Napoleonic unit he could find. So basically, sorry for those mistakes. Was not doing my fact-checking well enough last time. And then finally, one more thing I want to mention is next weekend I may or may not have a video because it's Salute. And just in case you don't know, that's like the biggest wargaming show in Europe or in the world. Well, maybe not the biggest, but it's really big. And I go there every year with Wargames Soldiers and Strategy. So I'll be away. And if I have time, I'll try to make a video for that weekend, but I'm no guarantees at this point. And I will be doing hopefully some Salute coverage too for you, so we'll have a kind of a different video that I'm going to upload after that. But if you are going to Salute, I will be there selling stuff at the Wargames Soldiers and Strategy booth and answering questions. So if you're coming, stop by, say hi. I'd love to talk to you. You can also meet some of the other people, the crazies who work for us, like our editor and, some of the, other types who hang around with us. And we'll be doing a really cool sort of Roman era demo game too, which actually is a participation game, so you can come by and play if you want, and that would be really fun. We'll be right kind of inside the main doors, really near the entrance actually, and we're pretty hard to miss because we have this enormous flag that sticks up super high, so yeah, we'll be really easy to spot. So if you're coming to Salute, stop by, see us. Okay, so let's just go right ahead and get started with painting our Napoleonic Hussar. Okay, to start out, I'm going to go ahead and base coat the Hussar's trousers and the top half of his plume using Foundry Deep Blue Medium. I'm now going to prepare the blue areas further by applying a nice heavy Azurman blue wash from Citadel to all of them so that we get some extra shadows down in all of the recess areas. Alright, so now I'm ready to start highlighting the pants. Now, I think Foundry may even make a triad for painting this sort of sky blue color that you see, but I don't have it, so I'm kind of making it up. So my first highlight color is going to be a mix of the deep blue medium that I used in the last step and some tomb blue shade color. And I'm going to apply that thinly all over the pants, and also I'm going to put it onto the plume using that overbrushing technique I discussed before, where I wipe most of the paint off of the brush and then very lightly brush it over only the sort of the high areas of that feathered area. And you want to make sure the tops of the plume segments are lighter and sort of become darker as you go down. I will then add a second highlight using tomb blue shade just by itself, doing the same thing and also concentrating it more towards the top on the plume segments. And then finally, I'm going to take some Toon Blue Medium. I'm going to use that almost as an edge highlight on the pants, really. Maybe a little bit on the knees to brighten it up. But that's the main thing. And on the plume, I'm really going to use it as an edge highlight, especially around the tops of each plume segment to help define the sort of the breaks in it better, which you can kind of see here very well. After I finish, I put another wash of the Azurman Blue over the plume again because I felt like it gotten too light and I wanted to have more dark in that, and especially emphasize the bottoms of the plume segments more than I already had. Alright, so now I can start working on the red areas of the figure, which are going to include his underjacket, sort of his sash, the bottom half of his plume, and also his saber hanger. And yeah, I know there is a good French word for that thing hanging next to his scabbard, but I'm going to call it that because my French is abysmal, my French pronunciation is terrible, and I will mangle it every time, so I'm going to refer to it as a saber hanger. Be sure you base coat all these areas really well, even though we're probably going to, we are going to go back over them, many of them, and put some yellow braid down, but we need that solid red base coat so we don't leave any gaps in the painting. As a base coat here, I am using Citadel Mephiston Red. It's a wonderful color. I use it more and more in my videos, but that's just because it's great. It's hard to find a red that really has good coverage, a bright red like this, that is, that really covers well, and is this pigmented, and it saves an enormous amount of time to use it, basically. So I really, really recommend you get that. I have yet to find a red with this much brilliance that leaves this great, a coat. I haven't tried as many of the other Citadel base colors, but my experience so far has been really good with them, especially when you're painting these kind of colors. Once that's done, I'm going to go ahead and take some cardboard crimson wash, and I'm going to apply that generously everywhere because there's going to be a lot of recesses here, especially on the plume and sort of around behind the sleeves and around that braiding that I want to darken down. So go ahead and generously apply that after you have base coated the figure. Once the wash is dried, I'm going to continue highlighting the red, and I'm going to start out with Evil Sun Scarlet from Citadel. This color I have thinned pretty well down, and it goes on really nicely. I find it really a joy to apply, especially over this nice solid red base coat, because it is more transparent, but it will beautifully brighten up that darker layer that I've already applied. Don't forget when you're painting the plume, as we did with the blue, to use overbrushing so that you don't get it, to be too concentrated down in the recesses. You want to leave that dark color there and focus the brighter colors towards the top of each segment and sort of the tops always. Once I've finished with the Evil Sun Scarlet, I'm going to take that and I'm going to mix in some Boneyard Medium, and I'm going to use that sort of as a high highlight on the red areas, especially around sort of the seams, the edges of the clothing, anywhere where more light would hit, basically. On that saber hanger, I'm sort of going to be practicing a gradient effect, so I'm going to be putting more, as you can sort of see, more bright color towards the top and sort of feathering it downwards. It's not necessarily an accurate way to do it in terms of how the lighting would strike it, but I think when you've got a large flat surface like that, same as on a shield or other thing like that, you need to do something like that to make it look more interesting, to give it just a little bit, a little bit more, depth, I suppose. I'm now going to go ahead and do a bit of base coating in different areas, and I'm going to start out by working on his outer jacket. This is also blue, but on this particular regiment, it was a different shade of blue. It was a much darker blue, kind of akin to navy almost, but not exactly. As luck would have it, though, I have a pretty good Foundry triad for this that is called French blue, and it gives about the results that I want for this particular color. But if you don't have it, you can probably improvise something else with other very dark blue colors. So I'm going to just go ahead and apply the shade color of that French blue all over the jacket and make sure it has good coverage. And then while that's drying, I'm going to do some other base coating work, and I'm going to go ahead and paint all the black areas on the figure. And that's going to include his boots here, which are going to be black leather. His scabbard, even though actually only a small area is going to be black, much of it's actually going to end up bronze, but it's easier just to paint the whole thing black right now. Also his cartridge case, which you can barely see, but it's just sort of hidden, concealed on his back behind his jacket, so don't forget it. And then finally his hat. You need to base coat that whole thing in black as well. And so by the time all of that is done, and you finish painting all of the black, well, the blue on his jacket will be done. We can go back and start working on that some more. And I'm now going to just continue highlighting the jacket using the other colors in that French Blue Foundry triad. So first I'm going to put on the medium color over top, and then I'm going to put on the light color. And this is a triad with a very subtle color graduation. So if you're like me, you may feel when you're done with that you didn't, get it quite bright enough on the areas where there's a lot of light hitting. So I'm going to then take some Foundry Deep Blue, medium, Deep Blue Light, kind of to taste in this case, sort of maybe mix them a little bit. And I'm going to use that to brighten up even further some of those areas that are getting a lot of light. And then after you're done, you kind of have to look at it, because in my case, I did that and I thought, maybe I've made it too bright a blue, because you need this to be a very distinctly different color from the pan. So if you let it get too light, you're going to run into trouble there. So you may then want to take some of the colors, like I did, from that original French Blue triad, and then reapply them again just to darken it back down if you got too exuberant with your highlighting. So now it's time to start on probably arguably the most difficult and time-consuming part of painting this figure, because so far everything we've done has been reasonably straightforward and actually not very hard, but this is the tricky part, and that's what makes these figures so difficult to paint. It makes them take so long, and that's all of the gold braiding, or yellow braiding in this case, that the figure's wearing. Because we're not painting an officer, the braiding is actually going to be yellow. It's not going to be gold. If you're going to paint an officer, you'd be doing all this with metallic paint, so, extra bonus challenge. So what I'm going to do is start out by putting a base coat on all those yellow areas. And I've made a special kind of brownish yellow color. I've mixed Foundry Ochre shade with Foundry Bay Brown. So I get sort of this nice deep brown yellow color. And that's going to be the base for everything. So now I'm going to start painting all those braided areas. And there are a lot of them. He's got tassels and trims on his boots. He's got sort of segments of his sash that are in yellow. He's got sort of piping on his sleeves. You don't want to forget that, and trim. And of course, all of the buttoning and braiding on the front of both his inner and outer jacket, and that's all over, so you can't forget that. Also, don't forget around the top of his collar, and also all of the sashes and things sort of attached to his hat. Those are all going to be kind of that braid. So you got a lot to do. And there's also freehand work to make this even more interesting. On the fronts of his pants, especially for this particular regiment, you've got sort of a diamond triangle pattern. You need to look at a book to see exactly how that looks, but you're going to have to freehand that in there because at least on these figures, it's not there. So you got to have that in. And on this sort of saber hanger, there's going to be a design too, because every regiment had one. They were often embroidered. By this regiment, it's going to be an imperial eagle, and then with the number 6 kind of written under it. It's going to be not too hard to write the 6 in this case because you've got a lot of space, but with this shade color, all you want to be doing is making a very rough shape of an eagle, and later on we're going to use other brighter colors to define that more. But just, but you need to have a good base for what we're doing here. And take your time with this. Please take your time. That's how you'll get good results. But it is time consuming. That's why these figures are so challenging. So put a good base coat on, and if you do that, it'll make all the layering and sort of highlighting we're going to do of the braid later. It's going to make it 100 times easier if you have a nice, clear, even coat. Now, because there are so many kind of recesses in the gold braiding or the yellow braiding, you're going to want to apply a wash to sort of get some extra shadows into them. And I am just going to go over everything carefully using a Agrax Earthshade wash. This shouldn't be too hard, but do be careful not to contaminate your other colors, obviously. And now I'm just going to start highlighting the yellow. The color I'm using to start here is going to be Ochre Shade from Foundry. And for the most part, you're really just want to go carefully back over pretty much all of the areas, except really down in the deep recesses on the braiding and, sort of at the very edges of things where they kind of disappear, so leave deep recesses, that nice dark color, because that's the reason we put all that wash on there. Yeah, and this is just, once again, careful, take your time. No, you don't have to get as complete coverage, obviously, as we did with the base coat. When you are doing the freehand work, you know, it's good to have a little transparency, leave a little bit of that darker undercolor showing, because that's what gives it sort of depth and a little bit of extra volume and doesn't make it look just flat. When you're working on the saber hanger, you want to start fleshing out the body of that eagle a little more. So we've got sort of a rough shape now, but you want to use this color now to sort of start defining his body, the shape of his head, and then sort of the outer sort of shape of his wings. You can also start defining some sort of feathers within that by making tiny little strokes. If you do that over that darker base, but then without covering everything, that'll make it appear like there's these sort of indications of separate little feathers. And we're going to continue, you know, building up depth and dimension there later on as we add some even brighter highlights to this guy. So I'm going to continue highlighting now using either ochre medium or ochre light. It actually doesn't matter. They're quite similar in this triad, but they're going to add the brightness, the sort of yellow color to the figure. When you're working here, sort of try to focus putting the paint on the sort of the center of every area that you're painting, and then sort of minimizing it as you move outward, because that's kind of what you get with this sort of thing where the light hits. It's going to be sort of brightest in the center and sort of fading out as it moves to the left and right. So pick a center of whatever you're working on and darken it out from that point. And on things like braiding, pick out the individual segments and focus the color more towards the top area and instead of towards the bottom area. On the saber hanger, you're going to want to continue picking that eagle out, highlighting outer wings, the tips of the feathers, and focusing that color on one side of his body and face so that we can get sort of a more of a rounded dimensional effect, so it looks like it's, you know, sort of, that'll make it look like it, you know, it stands out. It's more 3D, basically. So, you know, just take your time, but actually the higher the highlights get, the less you're actually going to have to apply, because you want them to be more and more sparing, because you don't want this thing to get too washed out or overlit looking. The final highlight color we're going to be using is going to be a mixture of Boneyard Light and some of that ochre from the last step, because I feel Boneyard Light by itself may be a little too creamy, not yellow enough, so I want to get a little more yellow in there. And what we're basically going to do here is continue what we were doing in the last step, but we're going to be even more selective. So we're still going to sort of paint the middles and work out, and only on the areas, sort of the tops of things. So on the braids, that's going to be sort of along the tops of the braiding, on the little button closures, and you're still going to sort of put it in the center and sort of work out, but even more sparingly, less of it. We're not going to go as far as we did with that last step. And so this actually will go a lot faster than you expect it to, because, you know, you're not going to have to really, just tiny dots of it are going to be enough to give us that emphasis that we need, because that's just what this is. It's emphasis. It's just to make it just a little more shiny. And on the saber hanger, it's going to be really just to accent the tips of feathers, just tiny sparing amounts on sort of one side of the body, just to give it that final highlight and give our bird here a little bit of definition. And the number, if you've been doing this, you should have just been putting each color successfully over top of the number 6 as we went along. And if you do that and sort of a little bit less every time, or thinner coat, then you will get a nice looking three-dimensional number there. Once I'm happy with the look of the gold braid, I'm going to move on to all of his belts and sashes, which on this regiment were kind of a white leather color. I'm going to be using the Arctic Gray triad to do these, but with one modification. I find that the difference between the Arctic Gray shade and the Arctic Gray medium is not very big. So I'm going to take that Arctic Gray shade color and I'm going to mix a bit of black in it to darken it down a little bit. And that's going to be my base for all of these areas. So where are you painting? Well, his belt, obviously around his waist, his sash, sort of, which holds his cartridge case, and, you know, so that sort of goes, you know, across his chest. The straps holding his saber hanger in place. Also, any sort of straps that attach down to his gun that he's carrying. Any of those kind of areas, any of that kind of belting or strapping, that's going to be this white color. So I'm going to apply that shade color, and then I'm going to take the Arctic Gray medium, and I'm going to apply that as a highlight color. These areas are pretty small, they're pretty concealed, so you shouldn't have to spend too much time on this. Oh, and don't forget that he's got a little medallion on the front of his hat. That's going to be white too as a base, so don't forget to paint that as well. So yeah, put that medium color on as we did on the braiding. Make it lighter in the medium, in the middle, and sort of then blend outwards. And then when you've done with that, go ahead and grab the white color, the high highlight,
apply that as well. And you can use that as an edge highlight sort of along the tops of the straps, and like especially on the front sash that he's wearing, you want to make sure you get that nice and bright white, because a lot of light would be hitting there. But you know, again, put it in the middle and blend outwards. With things like the saber hanger straps and the belties back, you're hardly going to see those, and they're really in the shadows, so you don't have to put too much time or effort into really highlighting those up to a very bright color of white. Okay, so now with the white leather straps done, we're going to move on to highlighting the black areas, which include his boots, his scabbard, his cartridge case, and his hat. I'm going to first start out with a highlight color of the charcoal gray medium color, and you can go ahead and kind of put that pretty liberally on all of those areas. Fit it down a little bit, you know, because, you know, you don't want it to be too heavy. It'll work better, especially on the hat if it's not too heavy. Then I'm going to mix that in with some Arctic Gray shade and kind of use that to get a little bit of a shinier effect, especially in the boots and the scabbard, because those are kind of really strong, shiny leather areas, and we want to get, you know, we want to sort of blend that out from sort of a middle point like we were doing on the braid, so that we can get a little bit of sort of a shiny effect going on in those parts. On the hat, you want to be a little bit more subtle because we don't want that to feel so shiny, so don't use too much of that there. And then finally, you want to take just the plain old Arctic Gray shade and use that as a real high highlight, but then really mostly as edge highlight, even on the shiny leather surface like the boots. So sort of along the tops, sort of on the, you know, the very edges of the, you know, the toes, and along the folds. And on the hat, you really want to be sparing, maybe just along the top edge, and then very lightly blend it out on the top, because yeah, it is getting hit by light, so you do want some bright color up there, but use it sparingly, and you know, just to build up some real shine and definition where you really need that color. So with all the sort of underlayers done, we can sort of move on now to painting the fur trim on his outer jacket. And in this particular regiment, that color was kind of a blackish gray color, but in order to avoid it looking a little bit too cool, I'm going to be mixing a little brown into that tint because I just need to warm it up a little bit. So I'm going to be applying a base coat here, which is basically going to be black with a little bit of bay brown shade mixed into it. And that'll just warm it up and give it a slightly different tone than the boots and the hats and that area. While I've got that bay brown color out, I'm also going to go ahead and base coat the gun stock and all of that, and kind of get it ready for further highlighting in just a little bit. With that done, I'm going to go ahead and highlight that black fur, and I'm going to use the charcoal gray triad for that, but in each case I'm going to mix a little bit of that bay brown shade into it. So the first highlight is going to be a mix of black, charcoal gray medium, and the bay brown, because I don't want it to feel too high contrast yet. I'm then going to go ahead and just take charcoal gray medium and bay brown as sort of the high highlight color on the fur, and then finally just a hint of just pure bay brown, but very lightly, and I'm going to do all those sort of with overbrushing because I don't want to overdo it, and I still want there to be plenty of the really black color down in the recesses here. So we're really going for a black gray kind of effect here, but just with a bit of that brown in there to warm the color up and sort of, you know, make this sort of slightly nice, you know, slight difference when where the light catches the color. After that, I'm going to just go ahead and move on to highlighting that gun stock that we already started. And I'm going to be using chestnut shade and chestnut medium for that, which are the colors I usually use to highlight wood. So with the chestnut shade, I'm just going to sort of apply that pretty liberally all over the musket barrel and stock, and I'm going to just, you know, blend it out sort of towards where there's shadows so that there's a lot less of it. The chestnut medium, I'm going to apply even more sparingly, really more as an edge highlight, sort of along that place where the stock sort of is joined to the barrel, or where there's that dividing line, and also sort of along the butt end there, where, you know, where there's a divide between the wood and sort of the brass end cap that you've got going there. But yeah, definitely I'm going to be wanting to apply a lot less in that case. And then finally, since I know I already have all these brown colors out, I'm going to go ahead and paint the Hussar's hair because I hadn't already, and I already have all these browns already mixed up, so I'm just going to go ahead and use them here. So I'm going to take that sort of mix of black, the charcoal gray medium, and the brown that I already had, and I'm going to use that as the base coat for his hair. And I'm then going to highlight using a combination of the bay brown shade and then the chestnut brown medium and the chestnut dark to kind of get, you know, a nice shade. Obviously with the chestnut medium and the chestnut dark colors, I'm going to apply those a lot more sparingly, kind of over brushing, because I don't want his hair to feel the same color as the musket stock. I want it to feel much darker, so I'm just going to kind of use those as sort of a highlight color on his braids and, you know, sort of his little ponytail at the back. But don't overdo those, because you definitely want to have a little bit of contrast. You can make his mustache a little bit lighter and a little bit brighter, because often facial hair is sort of a slightly lighter, different color than the hair on somebody's head. At this point, we're getting really close to being done, and some of the only things we have really left to paint are the metallic areas. Just before we get started, I do want to mention, don't forget to paint the rosette on the sort of the front of his hat. We already base coated it white, but there should then be sort of a red circle that you want to paint in the middle of that, followed with sort of a blue dot. I didn't show it on camera because it's pretty straightforward, but you know, you need to get that detail in there, sort of in between what else you're doing. Metal-wise, I'm going to start out by doing the sort of the brass, bronze-colored areas on this guy. He doesn't have anything really shiny gold, but he does have some sort of those brass accents, and those are going to be kind of on his scabbard. The most of his scabbard is actually sort of a brass bronze. The fittings on his sort of saber hanger are going to be brass bronze, and also the butt of his musket, and also sort of the trigger guard in that area you're going to want to paint in the bronze color. And also additionally, he's got a little bit of a plate sort of on the front of his hat. That's a kind of a brass bronze color, and also the hander of his saber. And I'm going to base coat those with a mix of the Foundry bay brown shade and then the Vallejo bronze color, and that makes a nice base coat from which we're going to, you know, work up. Once you've applied that, then go ahead and take just pure Vallejo bronze, kind of thin it down a bit, and go ahead and highlight those areas, kind of get them a little bit shinier. And then when you're done, you can finish up with just pure Vallejo gold. But you want to be sparing here because, you know, this is not an officer. We don't want him to be really blingy feeling. We just want to get a few extra areas of highlights, you know, some real extra shine on sort of the edges of some of these areas and, you know, the like. The other metal areas that you're going to need to paint are going to be the blade of his saber, the flintlock and barrel on his gun, and also the metal bits of his stirrups. These are going to be kind of a steel color, and I'm going to go ahead and base coat those using a mixture of black and Vallejo natural steel. You know, this shouldn't be too involved because the areas are not particularly big. I'm going to go ahead and highlight those areas then just with pure Vallejo natural steel. It probably will take a couple of coats because you need to thin it down a bit. You don't want it to feel too heavy, or else it just won't flow very well. And then finally go ahead and take Vallejo silver and use that as a high highlight, but you want to mostly focus that sort of on the cutting edge of his saber, because the stirrups and, you know, the barrel of his gun in those areas, those are kind of a darker steel color, and you don't need to get that kind of emphasis on those, so don't worry about it so much. I'm also going to then take some Azurman blue from Citadel, that's the wash color, and I'm going to very lightly apply blue wash to most of those steel areas, so you get kind of a blued steel effect, which is a really kind of nice way to, you know, add a little bit of extra, I don't know, a little bit of extra interest to your steel areas and make them look more like sort of the blued steel that you get on, you know, blades and on gun barrels, basically. Really, the final step now at this point is going to be to take our Hussar off of his base and attach him to the horse. And I just glued him very lightly to the base I was using with super glue, so he should break off very easily for you. And I need now to paint the bottoms of his feet because, you know, there wasn't any paint. So I'm just going to go over those with black. And I am going to do a little highlighting just because you don't really have to, but because I don't want just to feel like one color. So I'm going to use a little bit of the charcoal gray medium to highlight his sort of his heels and the bottoms of his toes, and a little bit of that dark sort of black natural steel mix on the bottoms of his stirrups. And you don't have to do this, but I just want it to not feel like it's just one color under there. So after you have finished painting his feet, then you can go ahead and just take a little bit of super glue and kind of apply it sparingly sort of under his legs and his crotch region. Yeah, it sounds kind of weird, as necessary. And then just go ahead and sit him on his horse and, you know, hold him there for a little bit. Be careful so that he can dry properly. And then you basically have finished up this figure. Okay, so that's our finished Hussar all mounted on his horse and all ready to go. I hope you found this tutorial useful, and it gave you some ideas about how you can kind of tackle a more difficult figure that's more complex with more going on. I don't actually think a lot of the techniques we did here were a lot more complex than things we often deal with, maybe with the exception of some of the freehand work we had to do when we were painting this sort of the gold trim on his uniform. But largely these are all fairly basic techniques. There's just a lot of things to do, a lot of different areas you have to worry about. And the trick here is to all break it down into, you know, manageable bits and not let yourself really get overwhelmed by just the sheer volume of different things there are to paint. And that's certainly true if you're going to be painting a lot of these guys. The trick really is just to, you know, break it up into bits and, you know, paint that same part on every single figure consistently and then move on to something else. Just do a couple segments at a time, maybe even every day, and it will take you a long time then to paint a whole group of these guys, but you won't feel overwhelmed that way, and in the end you're going to get a really good result. And you know, and there's absolutely no reason you can't get something like this. It's just about patience and not rushing yourself, not getting overwhelmed by the details. So if you like this video, please, like it on Facebook, share it with your friends, and definitely subscribe if you want to see more of this kind of thing. I really appreciate your subscribes, and leave me comments too. I want to know what you thought about this, if you liked it, if you didn't like it, you know, if you have questions. That's all really useful for you. And the next time we'll be kind of returning to a little bit easier, more basic figure. Hopefully it won't overwhelm all of you guys so much. And yeah, so until then, I guess I will see you next time.